Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Double Tap on YouTube. I am Stephen Scott, jumping in today to give you the chance to hear what our panel have been saying on the closure of AppleViz, a website that's been around since 2010 and has played a major part in blind people's lives when it comes to learning about Apple technology. For example, if you're blind and you got a new iPhone, it would often be the first place you would want to go to figure out what was new, what was available, what apps were accessible. You would read the blog posts about many of the cool features and tutorials on how to do things, including just getting started. It's been a major resource. It was set up by a guy called David Goodwin back in 2010. He has since decided it is time to move on from doing this, and as a result, the website will close on August the 31st if no one else can take on the site. Now, of course, this has raised a lot of concern in the community about David himself, rightly so, but also about the legacy of such an important site, such an important place, such an important community for blind people. So our panel had a chat about this over on Double Tap on the regular daily show, and I thought I'd bring you some of those comments here to YouTube to give you a flavour of what people were feeling. So first up, we got the reaction from our panel, which included the author of iOS Access for All, Shelly Brisbin. Also, Michael Feir, author of Personal Power, another book all about accessing iOS and the Mac, and Allison Meloy, the voice on that Real Blind Tech show alongside our good friend Brian Fischler. Here's what they had to say, their initial reaction to the news that AppleViz was closing.
We all are part of AppleViz, even if we haven't had a particular role in it, because it really is a site that has belonged to the community. And I think that's the way most of us felt about it, whether we were forum users or whether we followed the app guides or the extensive beta notes that always came out when new operating systems became available. AppleViz was just where you go. And the way I see it is it's done so much for the community. And David said this in his letter. He's just not able to continue at the high level he'd like to. He's got an all-volunteer team. He mentioned issues with problems in the forums, people not being as good as citizens as they necessarily should be, as well as just the technical upkeep required for a site. And I think what he's saying is, I've done this for 14 years and I'm just not able to do it anymore. And unfortunately, that has a great effects on so many people in the community who've relied on AppleViz since 2010.
I actually got my first iPhone 4 once I had discovered AppleVis, and I was not an easy sell to the iPhone. I was thinking, how is a blind person going to do all this stuff that they're saying they're doing with a flat screen? How's this going to work? And it took AppleVis to sort of help convince me to get my first iPhone, and certainly help me master my device. And eventually, I wanted to do something to help in that space, so I wrote the book. It really all goes back to AppleVis and this community of willing volunteers, willing help right there, answering your questions, helping you learn how to do things, demonstrating apps, all of these important pieces. And all of a sudden, this is closing. Just leaves a massive hole especially for new users coming in. It was so easy to just tell people, go to AppleVis. If they take nothing away from this lecture or this book, go to AppleVis, right? And now that's not going to help anymore, unfortunately, unless there's some way of saving this. And I don't know that there is.
Yeah, like you, Mike, I got my first iOS device in 2010. It was an iPod Touch. And almost immediately I discovered AppleVis because I went ahead and downloaded about 100 apps, and probably 80% of them were inaccessible. And I remember just looking around on the internet for places where I could find out about accessible apps, and I stumbled upon AppleVis, and I just began to learn so much about apps that were going to help me, and also new and better strategies for using my devices. And as I switched from an iPod Touch to my first iPhone, I can't really even articulate fully the impact that AppleVis has had on my life. I was on at least one AppleVis podcast. I listened to any number of podcasts over the years. I always checked the release notes for any new features and or bugs that pertain to voiceover users when a new version of iOS came out. And like all of you, I don't know where I'm going to send people. I am in senior management at our state's voc rehab agency, and I would send everyone, especially our older folks in our independent living older blind program, to AppleVis when they needed ongoing help with learning and practicing their devices and a place to ask questions. And now I just don't know where I'm going to send people.
It's worth pointing out that AppleVis does provide that function for the people that Allison is describing, new users, as well as those of us who think of ourselves as old hands. And AppleVis even had got the attention and the favor of Apple. And David alluded to this in his note about how Apple had actually given information to AppleVis, either publicly or less publicly, that helped us understand when a new beta came out what those new features were and what we could look forward to. So it can't be overstated the importance of AppleVis on the whole wide spectrum of the community, from those beginning users all the way to those of us who have books to write.
So that was the initial reactions from Shelly, Allison, and Michael there on the closure, or the announcement of the closure of AppleVis. But let's find out their thoughts when I asked them about what could have happened, what should have perhaps happened. Should there have been a succession plan for a site like this? Should it have been the case that David Goodwin put in place a plan to have people take on the website should he decide to depart? That was the question I put to our panel.
I would love to have seen that happen. I also don't think we know as much about the behind the scenes as some of us might like. So I can't get inside David's head because I don't know David personally. As I say, I know some of his team and I know them to be very competent, very talented people, but I don't know. And I think it's true. I want to say this because I've seen several folks on Mastodon basically say, I'm going to try to run it. I want to do something like AppleVis. And I so appreciate their devotion. I've had thoughts like that myself. And I understand people's desire to want to pitch in and say, hey, this is a thing I can do because I have this skill or that skill. And the thing I think is really important and that we should learn from what's going on right now is that if AppleVis is to come back, it has to be done as a group project. And it could be a small group. And there probably should be a leader or a couple of leaders. But those of us who really are passionate about AppleVis and also who have some portion of the technical and content-related skills required should be humble enough to understand that one individual can't do this. And that's the lesson of what David was telling us in his letter, is that one individual is just, it's just, AppleVis is so big and so important and it does so many different things that it's kind of beyond the complete control of one individual. The second part is, I think, if a group or if some means of succession ever was to come to AppleVis, it would be incredibly important for that group of people. Again, I think it's got to be a group to sit down with the AppleVis team that exists now, with David and his team, and say, tell us what we should know. What don't we understand about what's going on behind the scenes? Not in a gossipy way, but in a technical way and in a content way. Mm-hmm. What are the pieces that, as somebody who would run AppleVis, we should understand? And if there is a possibility for a group, and there, as Allison said, there's some really incredibly smart, talented blind people out in the community that could do this. But I don't feel confident that somebody who says, I alone can fix it, is the right answer for this.
Yeah, I would completely agree. It's so large now. And there's so much happening behind the scenes that we never had any inkling of because they took care of it, so much of it. And I'm thinking, like, my own personal experience in moderating. I had the magazine that suddenly developed a community that wanted to, talk between issues, right? So, okay. And all of a sudden, well, Mike, you're the editor of the magazine. You should be a moderator. I'm like, what? I was sort of pushed into this. And I kind of think maybe that kind of thing happened with David. It built up and you basically are asked to do more and more and more. And you think, yeah, I could probably do this. And you don't even feel the stretching, the straining, right? It's a slow process, and it's had 14 years to build. And it's tough. Like there's tough decisions he had to make that we will, as the public, will never hear about. And that's, I think a lot of people kind of think, yeah, oh, people should just, a group of people should step forward and do this. But that's, I think any group has to really come in with that understanding. Like this is not an easy thing to keep going smoothly, and it has to be smooth. If Apple is going to take it seriously, if other newcomers are going to feel safe at coming with their questions and hesitations and things, it has to be a safely run space, and it has to be, there has to be to be a way of getting to that credible, positive, constructive feedback. If you look at the comments on some of the forums and some of the threads, I mean, there was a lot of just nastiness there that really you had to wade through. You either had to trample on people's free speech, or you had to sort of somehow put up with, but still hope that people would slog through essentially to get to the more valid, positive, constructive criticism that was there in spades. And that somehow has to be addressed. That's no small exercise, even in that less technical aspect.
Oh, absolutely. It's as much about managing people as it is, managing the more technical aspects of running the site. There really would need to be multiple teams of people focusing on different aspects of managing this entire project. I could see it being an undertaking involving really dozens upon dozens of passionate, qualified people who were hopefully getting something out of it. Because yes, some of the behavior that I saw on some of those posts was just absolutely shameful, and that's part of what led to David's decision to close it. A small subset, because it really was a small subset of individuals who just couldn't keep their negativity out of what they had to say.
And of course, then there's the question, what happens next? So does it continue via the community? A group of people in the community come together? Is it an organization that takes it on? Or perhaps Apple themselves? Should they take it on? Here's what our panel had to say.
I think there are advantages to both. I would love to see Apple step up and take on some of this. They could fix a lot of the issues. They're finally putting in a tutorial in VoiceOver after years and years of it not having one. So they are going back and addressing some of these long-standing needs. I'd love to see them fix the App Store so that maybe there's an accessibility improvement flag, so you could search for and browse, even more importantly, be able to browse accessible apps and find out what's out there that will work with VoiceOver more easily. So they could fix a lot of these gaps. But on the other hand, they might put more controls over what is valid for people to discuss, especially if they need to keep something more secret until it's ready. Or I can see a bunch of reasons why you might run into they'd have to be willing to allow conversation, to take place, possibly to their detriment, possibly complaining about things that they'd rather not people complain about. So maybe that's the advantage of having it completely independent. Is you still have they can still obviously serve a liable notice or something like that to the site, but at least we have a space then that is free, is not directly under Apple's control, and people can point out problems without fear of censorship.
I am in the middle, possibly leaning a little bit more towards Apple taking more of a role in whatever this becomes in the future, mainly because there is a subset of Apple users, and some express it very eloquently, and others, not so much, as we've heard about over this hour in the AppleVis forums. But there is a subset of Apple users who feel that Apple have forgotten about people with disabilities and accessibility, and that they have stopped prioritizing fixing long-standing accessibility bugs. I tend not to feel that way. Yes, there are some long-standing bugs that are problematic. However, I think there are a lot of underlying reasons that I don't understand why those haven't been fixed yet. And every new release of iOS that I see just kind of revolutionary new features coming to VoiceOver that make my life as a blind person that much better. So I think, as Michael said, it could be a really cool way, whether it's the only way going forward that this content kind of lives on or continues, or whether it's another way. It could be a really cool way for us to continue to dialogue as a community directly with Apple, the people who can really make a difference in this space, and we can be part of that difference then. So I'm definitely leaning more towards Apple having a greater role.
I don't think Apple can own this and it continue to be a community resource, either because of Apple's tendency to want to control things, or because I think the community needs to trust that their voices are independent and they will continue to be heard. Now, on the other hand, Apple needs AppleViz, as they've proven by the fact that they have given the AppleViz team access to information that unfortunately a lot of those of us who try to communicate with Apple haven't always gotten. So it's been a preferred kind of resource. Could Apple potentially give a grant to AppleViz? Sure. But I'd rather see that than see them own it. Because once Apple owns it, or once Apple says this is an Apple-approved site, it's going to change the community aspect 100%. People aren't going to either feel as free or be as free to be as critical as they need to be of what Apple does. And the independence of AppleViz is absolutely crucial. However, yes, I'd love to see Apple provide more support, whether it be financial support that comes without strings attached in terms of like a grant, or whether it's just in terms of Apple saying, okay, you are a trusted site, we're going to provide you more detailed information when we release betas. Here are the new features in the betas that addresses accessibility, or whatever level of detailed information Apple can provide at AppleViz that doesn't get to go elsewhere.
So lots of comments from our panel. We'd love to hear your views as well. Get in touch and email us, feedback@doubletaponair.com. You can also call 1-877-803-4567. Leave us a voicemail and tell us what you think. A lot of you have been doing that already, and you can hear those comments in our daily show. Or, of course, you can find out all about us here at Double Tap by going to doubletaponair.com. Really intrigued to hear what you've got to say on this topic. It is certainly something we'll be returning to in future episodes for sure. For now, though, that is it for us. We'll be back again with another Double Tap on YouTube soon.